we often have to go reveal far more than is necessary. The way we use browsers is quite dumb right now. The average person probably has about 100 of these usernames and passwords. GDPR is probably one of the biggest failures in privacy technology that has happened. There will be an ecosystem or marketplace of trusted data because
Welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into the Bare Metal Podcast today. I've got here with me Ankur Banerjee of cheqd. Welcome.
Welcome to be here, Martin, at the Bare Metal Podcast, and very excited to talk to you about everything that we're doing at cheqd and our project Creds.xyz.
That sounds super interesting, so let's dive right in. Can you tell us how you got into crypto and how did you come to co-found cheqd?
I got into crypto around 2017, going to an Ethereum hackathon back when they used to give out not even testnet tokens, but mainnet tokens to developers by the bucket loads. And it was sort of my first introduction to decentralization, where that sort of started off my journey that ended up in me founding cheqd about 2.5 years ago. Is I started working on projects around decentralized identity. I was working with the UN High Commission for Refugees on how refugees would be able to carry documentation that helps them travel or perhaps prove what kind of skill set they carry, which was a public-private partnership. It was called ID 2020. And I sort of got increasingly working with a lot of government and digital ID systems. I had a lot of experience working with more traditional national identity and biometrics and passport systems, working with banks and governments. And I was quite fascinated with how could people have much more control about this, because a lot of national ID and passport systems are highly centralized and can be used by governments in any sort of fashion or manner they want to use. It's great if you have a nice government. It's not that great if your government tends to skew authoritarian. And so I got involved in a lot of decentralized ID projects, but kept on encountering both technical challenges and what me and my co-founders thought are going to be business barriers that make the adoption of this kind of new paradigm with identity possible. And that's where we started cheqd in 2021 to go solve those problems.
So how would you characterize cheqd? I mean, how does it, let's not get into too much detail, but, you mentioned a lot of challenges. So you guys decided to, approach this problem using, number one, launching an L1 blockchain, right? And, building, the cheqd logic. So why is this a good way to solve decentralized identity?
cheqd is an infrastructure provider. You can think of us very similar to how cloud services or cloud providers that are more centralized, like AWS and Azure, provide compute. We don't necessarily build identity solutions for a lot of use cases ourselves, but our aim is to provide the best, the fastest, the most tolerant network for developers who are building identity solutions, specifically around a concept called self-sovereign identity, which I'm sure we'll dive into later on in the podcast. And while bringing along a couple of different USPs, like how does any of this ecosystem function and how can people's data be monetized while remaining within their control?
So I can think of some ways in which L1 blockchain would make sense. For example, once identity is issued, unless it's explicitly revoked, it can't somehow be censored or it can't be hidden from you. It can't be hidden from view. Any others are top of mind of why the core infrastructure provider needs to be a blockchain?
The reason why we have it as a decentralized network, we don't store any of your personal data or information on a blockchain itself. That is a fantastically scary and bad idea. Even if you go and encrypt all of that data, encryption technology gets broken every 5-10 years. We're not even talking about quantum computing coming along. So it's kind of a cognitive switch that a lot of developers in the blockchain space have to do, because a lot of blockchain use cases tend to skew towards let's have everything on the blockchain. I think we are quite unique and different in the sense that maybe 5% of the action is happening on our blockchain, 95% of it is not. What the blockchain acts as, in our case, our network acts as, it's a way to go and write hashes, or it's a way to write public keys and signatures that are used to sign data, that is then used to validate any information that a person holds with them. So in a sense, what we do is, because none of that personal data is on blockchain, it's not likely to get leaked, it's not likely to get breached in the future, but it remains as a permanent record almost that can always be used to check the veracity of some data that a person is holding in an identity wallet, much like a crypto wallet.
I've checked up on your, on your website, what the parties are in sort of when we're thinking about identity verification, and there was an issuer, right? There was cheqd, and there was a verify. There was there's the person whose ID it is, the identity. I don't know what to call them, and then there was a verifier, right? So if I understand correctly, the role of to summarize what you're saying, the role of cheqd is to provide the rails along which a verifier can connect with an issuer about the ID that a participant somehow wants to present. So the chain contains not the data, but attestations to the fact that the data was that some ID or a data packet was issued by somebody to somebody. Would that be a fair characterization?
That's absolutely perfect and nailed it. And what we sort of like facilitate is that the proof or the attestations that you need to validate and what we call like trusted data is available all the time. And it's not just stored in a centralized API or a centralized silo, which might go down over time. It might not be accessible. So there's a question about like longevity here as well. Those two participants that he called issuers and verifiers, and the person whose data it's about, sometimes I just describe it as a sender and a recipient. So when you think of having something like a passport or a driver's license, I take those two examples because they're the most obvious ones that people think about when they think of their identity. The issuer is the government or the passport office or the driver's license office. And then you go and show it to someone in a variety of use cases. You might go and show it when you're renting a car. You might go and show it when you're opening a bank account. Or you might go and show it when you're trying to get into a nightclub. And that person that is receiving the information is what we call the verifier. What they're trying to verify is that the information that is presented in front of them has not been tampered. Now, the identity stuff actually applies far beyond just traditional paper documents. It can be anything that is related to your personal life. For example, it could be your e-commerce shopping preferences. It could be your browsing activity online, what kind of music you like listening to, your healthcare records, your education records, what kind of companies have you worked for and what positions did you hold in them for how long. So it's actually a very broad concept when we talk about identity. It's all of the various different things that make up our persona. But at some point or the other, the information is issued by someone. Sometimes you can claim that yourself. You can be an issuer or a sender of that information yourself. You can say, I'm really good at doing headstands. And honestly, you're the only person who's attesting to that. Or it could be issued or sort of spoken out aloud by somebody else, like a government agency or a DAO, even perhaps.
Sounds super exciting, and that was a whole lot of use cases. Let's go back to this concept you mentioned, the self-sovereign identity. I think this is a good time to dive in deeper. Self-sovereign identity sounds great, by the way. Sounds like I control my identity, and I get to manage it as I see fit, which is really cool. So, can you explain why you see it as such a strong idea, and how does it disrupt the state of the art today?
Well, the way that we currently think of identity is people think of it as usernames and passwords to log onto a website. The average person probably has about 100 of these usernames and passwords across various different sites. Sometimes we simplify that by clicking login with Facebook or login with Google. but that's just a shortcut to creating a username and a password. The natural reality of just being online and interacting even offline with websites, with companies, is that while you might be able to log on using Facebook or log on with Google, it doesn't actually bring much information about you along. It doesn't bring your preferences along to it. So the way I describe self-sovereign identity is almost like if you were able to have a folder in which you were able to store all of your work records, personal records, healthcare records, education records, your gaming history, be able to move from one service to another while taking that profile along, you have a lot more choice and flexibility as a user. If you decide that I don't like Twitter or X anymore, and I actually want to move across to a competing social network like Blue Sky or Mastodon, the reality is that you can't do that right now.
Or Farcaster.
You can do none of those things right now because it's locked in this centralized silo operated by the big tech companies. So the idea is that like if your data was a lot more portable and in your control, you as a customer have the choice to vote with your feet and be able to go to other like services and you can do that at any point in time.
Right. So the way I'm thinking of this now, sort of, let's say I have a Spotify account, right, where I've been listening to music for a year, and then I want to subscribe to SoundCloud. I could just, if the historical data on what I listened to and what I liked and didn't like was mine, I could sort of, when I'm logging into SoundCloud, it would recognize the metadata types and my identity social and say, hey, do you want to share your preferences with SoundCloud? Because then they could build your profile much faster.
That's precisely it. Like I remember a time when we used to create playlist files and go play them on Winamp, right? And you suddenly come. It's a old reference deep cut, but you could take that across to a different music player, and all of that would still exist. And in practical terms, you can't do that right now. Partly, people tend to say GDPR is an answer, but I think GDPR is probably one of the biggest failures in privacy technology that has happened. I think it's helped bring in some rules around you can delete your data, but mostly it's just annoying cookie pop-ups all the time that just say, hey, agree to share your data with 100 different people. So while you could get
or cancel this pop-up every time you come to the website. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, you can get your data out using GDPR from Spotify, but it's not in a usable fashion. You're probably just going to get a spreadsheet. And what do you do with that?
Or a fax. I've seen this too. But this so. By the way, you talked about me being an issuer of the data. I mean, in some sense, I could actually even write down my preferences for music.
Yes.
And then share it with SoundCloud if I choose to do this. So this would be one of these cases where actually, since I am the producer of the original data, it makes sense for maybe I don't need Spotify to even be an issuer, right? I could just state my preferences using some UI, store it somewhere, and then have it, sent to whatever service. This just popped up in my mind because it seems really strange that I could be the issuer of some sort of credentials. But if we think of this in a wider sense as the data I produce, like the tweets I tweeted or the music I listened to, then this self-issuing sort of starts making a lot more sense.
And I think it really depends on how much trust you want in that data. So if you're opening a bank account, you probably need somebody like a government agency to say, this is your legal name and this is your age, this is the address you live at. Whereas if we met up in person at a conference and you wanted to issue me something saying, I have actually met him in person and he is the co-founder of cheqd, then you could become an issuer. So it really depends on what are you trying to use this data for. Sometimes self-issued things are a bit like writing something down on a piece of paper with crayon and then saying, hey, I live at this address and I've said it. But that might not be trustworthy enough when you're trying to travel internationally. It might be good enough if you're just going to buy something online.
Right. I mean, it's the use cases where I need like a government body are those that I think people or I have the least trouble with. I sort of understand how, the attestation on the chain could, verify that I've been issued a personal credential by the police of the Czech Republic where I live. there's this sort of, the reason I'm thinking about these like self-issues, because that's what seems to me the extension of these, simple or standard ideas. And the personal contact is very interesting, because then people who trust me would be able to then say, oh, hey, Martin met with Ankur, so I think this ID is the Ankur I'm thinking of, and I'm going to go and contact him.
It's an old idea, like something called the web of trust, where you attest that I trust you, and you then in turn, go and endorse other people. And it almost then becomes a chain of people who could endorse each other in a decentralized fashion and say this person is trustworthy or this person is not trustworthy. And I think that becomes especially quite important as we move to a lot of decentralized networks, or even with generative AI, where you might not actually know if the party on the other end is an AI agent or an AI bot or a real human being. So I think there starts becoming a lot of interesting use cases for the self-issued or people endorsing each other use case.
So I'm wondering how self-sovereign identity and cheqd, somehow work together. I can think of one way where, I have a bunch of credentials or pieces of data that are issued to either by me or by some other party. I can store them all on chain in some sense separately, right?
Yeah.
And then I have sort of power over how I use this, because I can choose to reveal only some of these to a verifier.
Yeah.
I'll walk into a bar and I want to reveal that my age is over 18, right? I don't want to tell them my address or whatnot. That sort of intuitively makes sense to me. Are there other ways in which I can manage this data, this sort of wider identity that's associated with me, that's maybe not as trivial?
The concept that you just described there, where you only selectively show some of it, is very powerful. We support that on our network, called zero knowledge credentials or selective disclosure credentials. And I'll give an example of why that sort of selective disclosure is important. My partner keeps an old driver's license around, which has an old address, because she has been stalked by bouncers when she's gone and shown her ID at a nightclub. And having an old, because what you're trying to prove there is just trying to prove your age, but they're by sort of like the byproduct of seeing her driver's license, also seeing where she lives. And she doesn't want to be followed home by a stalker. The same thing happens online. We often have to go reveal far more than is necessary. So for example, with a lot of cryptocurrency trading, what you might actually need to prove is that you're not a US national, or you're not a national of certain countries not allowed to access this. But the way they have to do it right now is to ask you to show a picture of your driver's license and passport, which reveals everything about yourself. Whereas with the kind of selective disclosure or zero knowledge technology, you could prove with a high degree of confidence and say, this has been cryptographically tested in a blockchain. It's not been tampered. And I can give you 100% cryptographic guarantee that my passport is not issued by the US, but I'm not actually telling you any of the rest of
which
the
country
details.
this is.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think that's where the concept of selective disclosure becomes more powerful, and where you get to choose and reveal whether you live in London, whether you want to reveal it down to the exact house address or the general area or the postcode. There's a lot more control that you have as an individual.
It almost feels like a programmable identity. That's a phrase that pops into my head when I'm reading and listening to all of this stuff. I can, in some sense, predetermine or even I could even write logic that somehow controls which parts of the information are revealed in what context based on what interactions. So this really, it opens up a whole new field. I don't think we can adequately sort of capture this or go through this, but it's tremendously exciting space.
I almost think we'll have personal chatbots or agents where you can just go and describe. If I go to, say, an e-commerce website, give them my name or give them the fact that I'm above 18. And if they ask for more, if they ask for my exact address, then maybe prompt me to whether to reveal it or not. So I think the way we use browsers is quite dumb right now. We just go to a website and they're just hoovering up all of our information. I think we'll actually have personal chatbots and agents where we can describe our like say if this is a shady looking website, then don't give them too much of my data. Whereas if it's my bank, then sure, let them have my location so that they can figure out if I've been kidnapped on a holiday in Mexico.
Right, right. I mean, I can't help but feel that we're often encouraged to share as much information, like exactly that e-commerce website, you've got these cookies and this metadata being sent out. It's like, well, I can't provide better service for you, but coincidentally, I have a lot of data that I can sell now to somebody else. So that's a great that's a great side hustle. I'm really hoping this sort of controlled disclosure where I decide if the incremental value that I get is worth me sharing another piece of my data would be a much better. That's another aspect in which maybe I feel I'd be in sovereign control of my data. So that would be a feature I'd love to see. You guys also have to skip to another topic. You have what I'd call a flagship product, Creds.xyz. Could you tell us what's that about?
Absolutely. So Creds.xyz was started as an in-house project because we felt a lot of the applications of self-sovereign identity were often focused on what we call traditional enterprise, like getting your education records, healthcare records, government records, and passports, things that are issued by high trust organizations. We think that those are extremely valuable use cases, but to be honest, how often do you have to go show your passport, or how often do you need access to your health records? I've probably been asked my education degree once in my lifetime. So we think there's a far, far broader use case for identity when it comes to online browsing and personalization and e-commerce, as well as on-chain activity being used to personalize your Web3 and DeFi experience. So we started Creds.xyz as there's a whole bunch of developers and partners who are doing these traditional enterprise use cases on our network, but we want to narrow down on Web3 use cases. The first point where we started off is Web3 reputation. A lot of people are known by pseudonymous handles, probably by the handle they go by on Telegram or Discord or Twitter/X. And we started looking at that.
I'd be shipped the code if you didn't burn my name, right?
And have you ever had somebody who's created a lookalike profile or an account for yourself?
No, that hasn't happened to me.
Well, it's happened to me about
has that happened to you?
About 2 or 3 times. Like people with exactly the same profile, same bio, trying to send them to Google Forms to go shill the check token, and obviously a scam.
Right. So, something that is of interest is something related happened to us. So we had a company in the Czech Republic for it's completely off topic. Trips in nature where you're guided by your mobile app. Somebody used the name of the company to create fake hiring profiles, advertisements, in an attempt to hoover up the data on the candidates, right? As you're filling out your job application, you're used to handing over all this identity data. So, and those are taken down very fast. We can't even issue a takedown notice. So it just goes up, is used for a while, and then shut down immediately. So identity, obviously, super hot topic and more and more important as the world moves forward, right? Anyway, so back to Creds. We're sort of digression to fake profiles, but Creds seems to be a product that actually has business partners that's being used in various ways. So I'm excited to hear about what specific deals or use cases do you have with active users on the business side.
Yeah, something we're quite excited about actually is a partnership that we have with an identity provider called Finclusive, which comes from the world of traditional take a picture, take a scan of your passport, and then it does KYC. But being able to hold that KYC credential as a reusable thing, which can then be used to go answer stuff like, am I a US national or not? Or when was the last time I had my ID checked? Or being able to say that I'm a user above a certain age and therefore I should have access to this CFI or DeFi product. I think that is something that we're quite excited by. Something else that we're exploring.
Where is this company incorporated? Just of interest, is this European or a US company?
It's a US company based out of Utah.
It's a US company using this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they've been pioneers within the self-sovereign identity space. They really bought on to understanding how powerful this could be. So we've been quite lucky to get them on board. We are also partnering with a wallet provider called Verida, because from the beginning, we created Creds.xyz as an identity wallet in which you can go store all of your Web 2 data, all of your Web 3 data, all of your community endorsements or endorsements by people in a single wallet. But we don't want to be the only proprietary wallet provider. We want it to be a pluggable architecture. So part of this partnership is with a wallet network called Verida as well.
So on the side of Finterest, I understand that this is really, you guys have sort of technologically enhanced the KYC process to reduce friction. So KYC credits can be reused. Totally makes sense to me. What was the specific use case with the wallet provider? Was it authenticating the user when interacting with the wallet?
I think we want to walk the walk and talk the talk in terms of portability. So we designed a sort of in-browser wallet within Creds.xyz that is built a bit like WhatsApp. It's end-to-end encrypted. So once you have credentials in there, even we can't see what is it that you actually have. It's only decrypted when you open up the application yourself. But part of what we've been working when building out this product is if you actually want to move and use a different wallet or different identity wallet, you should be able to. So Verida is just an example of another identity wallet in which you could store all of this information about yourself.
Let's move toward sort of the vision of the world that you guys are building for. So looking forward, a few years, what do you think the world will look like so that it needs, cheqd? How will cheqd capture value in the ecosystem?
So one of the ways in which we differentiate ourselves and we capture value, and we've always spoken about this, is everything we've spoken about sounds amazing. Wouldn't it be great if you had all of your data? The problem is, how do you convince the people who hold that data about you to give you a copy or give up control of that data to yourself? And that, I think, has been the big problem of this self-sovereign identity space that has sort of existed for 8 years, however long it's been around. And we sort of looked at this and went, what if we were able to have a commercial model where if it's data about yourself that you reveal to someone, you could get paid for it or compensated for it? Or maybe perhaps the issuer of that data gets compensated for it. We want to create a flexible model. And we facilitate that through privacy-preserving payments on our network. So let's say you went and provided a full profile of yourself to an e-commerce website, or you went through faster onboarding with a centralized exchange because you were able to do it using a digital credential rather than have to go rummage around for a passport. Then there's value for the person receiving that data. They can trust it a lot more easily. They don't have to use humans to go check that data or look at whether it's trustworthy or not. And so they can make a payment either to yourself as a data holder or to the issuer. We facilitate that as a network. And obviously, as a decentralized network, the protocol keeps a portion of the revenues. So if you think about it, it's almost a lot of the use cases that we see are about token exchanges or DeFi that is keeping some margin when you're converting from one token to the other for brokering that exchange. We essentially see ourselves as brokering the exchange of identity information, and the people whose data it's about should have some financial benefit behind it. And I think what that creates is a model where issuers have an incentive to give you a copy of that data so that you go and reuse it in as many places as possible. The closest analogy is probably like getting an Amex card, where Amex gives you points to go spend on their card. What's happening in the background is Amex or Visa or MasterCard are picking up some fees from the shop where you went and spent your money with. But they're giving you an incentive to use that information on that specific card because there's a benefit to them. So what we think is there will be an ecosystem or marketplace of trusted data, because instead of keeping it close to their chest and locked within a centralized silo, they have a reason to hand you a copy over.
I think aligning the incentive of the issuer with me as the, let's say, the sovereign over the data is a very interesting idea. I mean, I've heard before these ideas like, you can get paid for sharing, let's say, healthcare data with a pharma company that's doing research, is interested in understanding whether a new type of drug might or might not be useful. And, they could just, in some sense, they could go online and ask people to reveal some specific packets of data and then pay them for actually being able to, compute or understand the ecosystem. Where that's, I've heard this a few times. I haven't heard before the idea that you could actually build the infrastructure to also partially reward the original provider of this data, because that definitely would then, as you say, align them or incentivize them to actually share the data with you, so you can go and market it as many times as possible. That's an interesting twist. I haven't heard this one before, so I hope that works for you guys. Yeah. Do you have any? Are any of these constructions sort of active, where you'd have incentives partitioned between, say, the issuer and the subject of the data?
This is fully built out, and we have like Finclusive, like the KYC provider that we spoke about, is looking into this. One of the other twists that we did is we built this as a freemium model, so you can always show any data that you have about yourself for free. It's not a proprietary or locked format. But if you want a higher level of assurance and you want to check that this data is still fresh, still valid, that's when the payment happens. So we've seen use cases for this being implemented by people when using creds.xyz for testing the reputation of community members. Should they get access to an airdrop? Should they get perhaps early access to an NFT drop? Type use cases are something we are having conversations with. Similarly, for governance, should we give a higher weightage to some people in the voting process beyond just their stake? And we'll pay a small amount to validate that they're actually within the audience that we want to give a higher weightage on the vote. KYC is an obvious example, because KYC is spectacularly expensive. It's about $5-10 per person minimum if you do it through the traditional techniques. So if you're able to do it using
KYB, right?
And KYB is somewhere around $1,000. Yeah, $1,000 to $2,000.
$2,000 I've seen.
So we've actually found a lot of traction where people understand the margins are vastly different when you're thinking about doing it using what people charge in the traditional world versus what they can do with cheqd and decentralized identity.
Looks like the future of identity is wide open. So fingers crossed that you guys plow the fields there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And honestly, we look at this as we honestly don't want to be the only provider in the market. I think the whole point is interoperable. So we hope we build the best product and you come to us. But if you want to walk out and leave, we want to make that possible too. And if you want to test it out, I would say, go try something we called our Creator Studio, a bit like OpenSea Studio as well, to issue credentials on creds.xyz. You can also test out the holder side of credentials or collectors, similar to NFT collectors. You can check that out on creds.xyz as well.
Creds.xyz. Yeah, this sounds like a great place to end the podcast. So thanks very much, Ankur, for coming on. This was definitely very instructive for me.
All right. Thanks for having me, Martin. And the wide-ranging discussion on how you can have more control on your data.